But if you don't know what you're saying no to, then you don't know what you don't know. And is that true informed consent? Like, is that clarity?
Are you overwhelmed by motherhood and barely keeping your head above water? Are you confused and frustrated by how all the other moms make it look so easy? You can't figure out how to manage the chaos in your mind, your home, or your family. I get you, mama. Parenting with ADHD is hard. Here is your permission slip to let go of the Pinterest-worthy visions of organization and structure fit for everyone else. Let's do life like our brains do life, creatively, lovingly, and with all our might. When we embrace who we are and how our brains work, we can figure out how to live our lives successfully and, in turn, lead our families well. At the end of the day, we just want to be good moms. But, spoiler alert, you are already a great mom. ADHD does not mean you're doomed to be a hot mess, mama. You can rewrite your story from shame spiral to success story. And I'll be right here beside you to cheer you on. Welcome to Motherhood in ADHD. Hey there, successful mama. It's your friend, Patricia Sung. Today's guest is Christina Crow of Dig a Little Deeper Therapy. Now, I found Christina somewhere along the rabbit hole of social media, but I fell in love with her because she was posting videos breaking down different studies and articles about ADHD into digestible information I could actually understand, which unfortunately is really hard to find. It's hard to find quality information that makes sense in an everyday way, and that's how Christina explains it. Well, she can do this because she is a registered psychotherapist and a clinical supervisor located in Ontario, Canada. She owns her own private practice and she trains new therapists. But most importantly for us, she's a mom who has ADHD. As soon as I considered doing a series on medicine, she was one of the first people that came to mind. Now, of course, I have to do my disclaimer that this episode is not a substitute for seeing your own doctor. This is not medical advice. What Christina and I are doing is equipping you to know what to look for and what kind of questions to ask. And what do you want to think about when you're trying to figure out, is medicine right for me? Is this a decision that makes sense for me, for my child, for our family? I want you to make this decision from a place of solid information where you've done your research with quality sources that have good information that's solid, backed in science and experience, so that you're not making your medicine decision out of fear. I want you to make this decision from the foundation that you've done the research, you understand, you've asked the questions, and you're making the choice so that it's comfortable for you, knowing that it makes sense for you and your situation. There is so much information on the internet that is incorrect. The myths, the nonsense, there's so much of it out there, and it's hard to filter through all of that, family opinions, all that outside noise, and really trust the decision that we're making. Christina and I talk about that, about how we tend not to trust our own decisions. We don't have a lot of self-trust because our whole lives someone has told us, or we've gotten some kind of message that our perception is slightly off. We weren't quite measuring up. So we'll dig into Christina's background and how she got diagnosed with ADHD. And we touch on mindfulness, worry, the struggle we feel as a mother when we're watching our kids struggle or not live up to what we imagined they would turn into or how they would grow up. Then we discuss what are some of the things that we can consider when we're deciding whether or not ADHD medication is right for us. When we hear about big pharma capitalizing on weakness, or we hear negative messages from family, how do we figure out what the right decision is for us? So if you're wrestling with the decision of whether or not ADHD medication is right for you, I hope that these questions and this discussion lead you down the path of making the decision that sits well in your heart. Let's welcome Christina Crow to the show. All right, Mama, let's meet Christina. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start first with you and who you are, because I really love featuring other moms who have ADHD because we have that connection together and understanding how our brains work. So would you tell us just a little bit about how you figured out that you had ADHD and a bit of that journey of learning about how your brain works?
Sure. So funny story. Like many adults today, I did not know that I had ADHD until a child in our family was diagnosed with ADHD. And this happened right after I finished my graduate training to become a psychotherapist. So I was really upset that I didn't really know much about ADHD at all. And I was like, oh, geez, like, was I sick that day? Like going back through my books, and it all clicked. So once I saw it, there was one particular symptom checklist that everything clicked, it all came flooding in. So really quickly, was able to fortunately access an assessment for him. And then I would say I spent the next 3 years like saying, this is clearly all my husband's fault. This must come from his side of the family and all of his characteristics. And so spent a lot of time reflecting on how functional I was and, all the things I needed to do as a therapist mom to support our kid. And then at some point, it really did start to dawn on me that, wait a minute, I actually kind of have some of these things too. And it's really funny because I think part of the reason it didn't occur to me right away, not because I'm like arrogant or anything, but because I'm in the moment and thinking about how I function today. I was probably, I want to say like 37, 38 around that time, maybe. I'm really not good at math, another one of my things. But so I think there's so many adaptions that I made and so many things that for all the, dumpster fires in my life before that clearly paint a picture of pretty severe ADHD. Now looking back, a lot of those problems had kind of righted themselves in a really painful way. I wish it didn't take that long. But then once I went and got my assessment, I remember distinctly my assessors kind of saying, if we had to diagnose you based on how you present today, I don't think we could diagnose you. You don't meet criteria. But when we listen to your history and we have all the pieces of everything you've been through over the last like 30 years, wow, you're a rager. Like you have severe. And so I was diagnosed with moderate to severe, I think, combined hyperactive type, because, like mama, certainly that is exactly how I present. And so I'm lucky in that I was able to access treatment. I knew a lot of the psychosocial interventions, obviously, and then access medication right away. And it was a transformational experience. And I knew it would be because of what, my kid had been through. So a really positive experience from that perspective the whole way through. Yeah. So that was kind of how it happened for me.
When you look back at all those changes that happened along the way to get you to where you are now, like you don't look like a hot mess ADHD disaster. You've figured out the coping mechanisms that work for you. Mostly. I mean, I don't think we ever figured it all out, but like, what do you think was the key that moved you along in getting to put all those pieces together, knowing that you didn't know?
The emotional dysregulation symptoms, right? The more I learned and then the more I worked with it, both in supporting our family transition. So when we changed everything in our home, which is what families are supposed to do. So like I knew how to access all the stuff and we did the things that actually made life easier for all of us. And I was like, wait a minute, why am I benefiting from this as a parent, right? And I've always been really conscious of a parent that I can't ask my kid to do something I can't do. So I'm here like upset that my kids like forgot stuff and they're getting upset and it's like everyone's melting down at the door and we're going to be late. And I can't even be upset with him because it's not on him to be organized and on top of it. It's my job as a parent to have led that. I'm the one that should have the night before, And so when I had those reflections with myself, I was like, well, wait a minute, why didn't I do that? Well, what was I doing last night at 8:00 on the couch? And what was going on for me? So it's just like a lot of mindfulness has saved my butt the whole way through. But a real mindfulness practice that allowed me to observe myself, I think, in my own environment. It becomes then this question of like, well, do I need treatment? Is it really mild? Thankfully, I had a family physician that was willing to kind of work with me. But I actually did get the whole psychological experience assessment because I wanted to know what my clients were going through. So it was actually more of curiosity, really, about the experience to get that done. The proof was in the pudding. I didn't need it really for any other reason. But so that was a really interesting experience as well. But being able to observe yourself is a feat of executive function. So that takes a lot of work and medication.
Yeah, I was actually, I met with my ADHD coach this morning and we were talking about how your higher self can view your lower self doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like blowing my mind because I was describing it. And then she like read back to me like this. So you're saying like you're watching yourself do stuff. And I'm like, that
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm in like some kind of weird sci-fi, like the matrix of like watching myself do things and trying to convince myself of things. And I was like, whoa, like that whole process of learning to watch ourselves
Yeah.
is a learned skill.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be able to slow down long enough. So quell that internalized hyperactivity. You've got to have attentiveness to the things that are going on around you. And then you've got to be able to sustain your attention. And there's a whole lot of cognitive processes going on there. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know enough about that stuff to be able to there's like a lot of hoops your brain has to jump through to be able to do that. I mean, I will also say, I think people with ADHD probably have a greater chance of being really good at mindfulness than they might give themselves credit for because we're already in the moment, right? So now we're just applying intentionality and taking away the judgment. And I think if 2 out of 3 instead of 3 out of 3 tasks we've got to learn, right? I think people with ADHD can get really good at mindfulness.
But that is incredibly encouraging because anytime I've talked about mindfulness, whether it's on the podcast or social media, immediately I feel like everyone jumps up and is like, we can't do this.
Well, I would think it's really important to distinguish. There's different types of meditation, right? There's like the guided meditations, like you throw on your Calm app and you listen to someone walking you down a beach. That's not mindfulness. That's a guided meditation. There's like sound meditation, which is quite beautiful and relaxing, but that's not mindfulness either. Mindfulness meditation is something really distinct and separate. And it's so easy to do all day long in the moment. It takes practice. It's like a muscle you can learn and you can flex. But I think sometimes when people hear they've got to try meditation or mindfulness, that all gets like blurred together and they think they got to listen to something on the Calm app. And that's
think about anything.
I'm not dissing the Calm app. I like the Calm app. But I mean, so those two kind of don't really work for me, but what works for me is mindfulness. So I just wanted to clarify, like really specifically, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, I'm like, oh, I could so go down this rabbit hole and I really want to, but I'm like, nope, Patricia, rein it in. I just appreciate that distinction in understanding that mindfulness and meditation and all that, like all that together is one big giant blob. And it's not
all the same.
All the same. And it's not one thing. There's lots of different pieces, lots of different layers. And I'm gonna rein it in and I'm gonna hold that thought for some other time that I really want to talk about. Okay. Stay on track. What would you say are the 2 areas that you really excel in as a mom with ADHD? Like how your ADHD makes you a really great mom? And then, of course, conversely, where do you struggle a lot in motherhood because of your ADHD?
Oh, these are hard questions. Welcome to my therapy session, guys.
I know. Ooh, the tables have turned.
So I think what I'm good at is that the day the diagnosis came for my kid, like that week, I immediately observed any of the like sadness about it or worry or fear that I had. I knew wasn't because of him. It was because of, I really recognized like, oh, wait a minute. My hopes, quote unquote, about what he would become or worrying about his potential and all that kind of stuff was all about me and me and me. And actually had nothing to do with him and who he was. I recognized him getting the diagnosis was an opportunity for me to get my head out of my ass and actually get to know this child I have instead of the child I thought I was creating. It was a very humbling moment. And I think being able to put my shit aside and focus on the person in front of me as him, I don't know if I'm good at it. I knew I needed to do it immediately. And I was immediately kind of like ashamed and devastated that I hadn't known that really, that I was like, you will learn, like, I'm going to teach you how to read. I'm going to teach you how to do this stuff. And you're going to have all these experiences and expose you to all these things. And you're going to have this amazing life. You're my kid, all the things we do. We have all these hopes and dreams for our kids and something's wrong. It could be as minor as the first time they need glasses. It's like, oh my God, he doesn't have perfect eyeballs, right? To something like this, right?
Yes.
And I just knew it. And I think what actually gave me the capacity to be that in that moment is because before I was a mom, I was a stepmom. And so I had 2 other amazing kids in my life that I let them guide me as to what our relationship was going to be. I let them lead. So I think I've always honored kids and honored them as teachers and teaching them about me. So I would say that's what I continue to do well, is I want them to tell me who they are, and then I'll follow suit, not rather than the other way around. What am I not good at? We should invite them in here for that. I don't know. I think
what you're not good at, but what do you find just more difficult? And you know that has to do with your ADHD.
Like I worry. Okay, so I worry a lot. So the intensity of worry, of needling in on things that are not going to matter, never mind in 5 years, they don't matter tomorrow, right? So the emotional intensity piece, like, yeah, I'm still human. Like something goes off scale and it's like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And I'm pretty quick to recover from that versus me 10 years ago or me 20 years ago. But that part, I think, bugs me the most is I wish I were a more lighthearted or carefree mom than I probably am. Like when I am putting effort into it.
I'm like, yes, me too. So much so there's so many times where I wish I was fun mom.
Yeah. And
worrying mom.
ADHD, aren't we supposed to be fun? Right. So I don't know. I don't know if like the guys get to be fun ADHD and the women don't. I don't know. I'm not a perfectionist, I don't think. For sure, like I had to be too responsible too young, like a lot of us, and internalized a lot of that stuff. And I think that's it. I don't know that I played enough as a kid. I'm like, so I try to play as much as I can now as an adult, but it's hard because I'm responsible, right?
Yeah. No, I'm like, that's like a whole, and again, that's another rabbit hole I wish I could jump down with, where we so often come from families where we were required to be more adult than have at that age.
Our ADHD families are like, ADHD is genetic to a large extent, right? And very few people in that generation are diagnosed and treated, never mind. So it runs rampant. And so that's why it feels like everyone has ADHD, because, well, you're in the pool of it in your mix, in your family, extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents. So, it makes sense from that lens. And that's also why a lot of the behaviors seem normal. I was like that as a kid. Nothing's wrong with me. I turned out okay. And it's like, okay.
Right? That's what I tell people all the time. I was like,
why are you here then? Right? There's something going on because you're here with me. So let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yes. That one gets me every time. Knowing that has made it a lot easier to not get mad at people when they say that. Mm-hmm. People say, but everyone's a little bit like that. I'm like, welcome to the club. Your family must be one of us. That's why they feel that way, because they're
strong in your family. Yeah.
Yes. So what would you say is one thing that you're really proud of accomplishing now that you know you have ADHD?
Like personally or professionally or
anything?
I think like our family has done really, really well with it. And I think we've gotten to the place where we recognize all of the strengths that it brings to us. So to be clear, I am not in the ADHD as a superhero camp. That's cool if you like that. And I actually don't even know for sure what your position is on that. I think you recently might have.
I think we're in the same camp, but I'll let you finish.
So there is a place where there's gifts, but before we get to the gifts, we have to untie all the damn knots. So I think we've untied all the knots. There's a real freedom in knowing yourself and in knowing your brain really well and knowing why you do the things that you do, and in coming to terms with, it's actually really neat to be able to think in a nonlinear way and to do all the things that I can do. I couldn't do any of the cool things that I do if I didn't have ADHD, I don't think. I mean, maybe over the course of my whole lifetime, but I don't think I would have done any of them by the time I was 40, that's for sure. So I'm lucky in a lot of ways, and a lot of the experiences I've had, that I've been fortunate enough to have bounced around enough that nothing really completely derailed my life, although it could have. There's a lot of near misses in there, as I'm sure a lot of people with ADHD can look back and find themselves. So I think I'm just really proud of the way that, even though it was really hard, that period of time after diagnosis for all of us as a family, like trying to wrestle with it, we did it. We did the work together. And I think we all know each other really well, and we're closer than ever. Yeah, I'm proud of that.
Yeah. That's a perfect note. I'm like, we'll end there and let's move topic. I'm like, that makes me really happy. And it's encouraging. I know this is one thing I always worry about, is when we talk about these kinds of things, we're like, I didn't really struggle with that portion. Other people feel like they should have also not struggled with that portion. Mm-hmm. And what I've kind of been like mulling over is, how do I normalize that we all struggle with different things? And just because we didn't struggle with this thing doesn't mean we didn't struggle with that thing. And that instead I want to take that as encouragement of it is possible to go through that without all the struggle, or not without, but with less struggle. Because there's a lot of moms who will listen to this at some point and know that eventually their kid's probably going to have that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
To know that it is possible to work through that with less struggle than more struggle. Like it is an option.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like uber positive, the world is sunshine and rainbows and nobody has problems.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think there's a couple things going on, but the one way for me personally as a mom that I think what taught me that skill was actually in that moment when I said I had to stop and get to know my own child, like, wait a minute, who are you actually? Because the things that are easy for him his brain is amazing to me, but we don't have strengths in the same places. So there's things that he can do that I can't do. And I watch him with wonder. I'm amazed by the things he can do. And I'm also confounded and driven bananas by the things he can't do that I can do. I mean, there's like socialization and gender differences there, but he's amazing. Like it's a joy to like watch him evolve and grow and become the person he's becoming. And it's nothing like me in a lot of ways. So knowing that boundary, so having healthy boundaries, knowing that my experience is valid and it doesn't have to be the same as other people. So there's boundary exercises that I think when you're kind of working through all of this stuff from a mental health point of view, become really helpful to frame up how we think about ourselves and other people and other people's experiences versus our experiences in life. And then, if you zoom up 10,000 feet and you look down at things, I think people with ADHD have always had this inner knowing about themselves. So if you were diagnosed as a kid, well, then someone told you as a kid what it was. But if you didn't know what it was, if you were always messing up and not quite sure, and maybe a beat off and a little bit laughing a beat off at the joke, and the person who people kind of ignored sometimes, even though you were quote unquote popular, like awkward in conversations every now and then. If you grew up having experiences like that, then you kind of grew up knowing that there was an inside you and an outside you. And until you're diagnosed, there's no opportunity really to have that make sense. And once you're diagnosed and you actually really truly understand what ADHD is, then all of a sudden that stuff snaps into view and it makes sense. So then I think then it becomes easier because you've always had a different experience because you've always looked to external people to validate your experience, right? Because you can trust yourself, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So then when it comes to this part, well, it's kind of like, well, it wasn't like that for me. Is this really what I have then? Because you're constantly trying to make it okay based on what other people are telling you, rather than saying like, it doesn't matter what other people are telling you. If you're having that experience, that's yours. That counts. Except you've been living your whole life with getting the message inadvertently. It's not like your family meant to give you that message that your voice doesn't count. I mean, maybe they did, but let's just assume they didn't, right?
Yes.
So I think it all comes together. It's nice to have the guidance of somebody who either has ADHD or knows it really, really well, because maybe their kid does or their partner does or whatever too, right? Does that make sense?
No, that was beautiful. And I loved it. I loved every minute. And I was like, oh, she's like putting the right words to the things I think about in my head I've really been wrestling with this whole concept of self-trust and how the messages we've received throughout our life are that we are perceiving things incorrectly. And that's how we develop this distrust of our own perception.
Yeah.
And that's why
someone else to validate it.
Yeah. So when you're constantly slightly offbeat, you're also constantly going like, okay, how do I course correct? Like, I should have done a little more of this. And yet somehow, even though you know that you're off and you're constantly trying to mitigate that problem, you still don't ever seem to catch up. And that's where I think a lot of women with ADHD struggle, especially people who are getting these super late diagnoses of like, I have spent my whole life with the message, whether purposeful or not, that I'm slightly off and not correct. And so you're constantly trying to like realign everything. So you never trust your own judgment.
Yeah. And the overcorrection is perfectionism.
Yes.
Right. That's the overcorrection drive.
And then the thing that's just been weighing on me is how do we start to change that narrative? That's where my hyperactivity comes in, is that little hamster wheel is constantly spinning of how do we start to encourage women to trust themselves because they are correct. Just because you didn't follow up with everybody's perception doesn't mean your perception was incorrect. It was just different. Anyway, here I am getting off on another tangent, but
yeah, we could do 4 more. I got big thoughts and feelings about that question, but I mean, that's a whole other ball of wax, right?
Well, what I'm like, ooh, okay, well, we're going to have to do like an Instagram live or something to dive down into some of these. I'm like,
yeah.
Ooh. Okay. But again, I'm supposed to be talking about medicine here. So let me get onto that topic. So the reason I reached out to you is that a little while back, you had posted a video that when you explained why somebody would want to take ADHD medicine, like it was short, because also why do people make such long videos? It was like 2 minutes and it hit all the highlights.
One of the longest videos I've ever made too.
In the world of social media, it was like, thank you for explaining this in 2 minutes. That was lovely. And it hit all the points. And I was just like, when I started thinking about wanting to do this medicine series, that video was like in my head of like, I've got to talk to Christina about this topic, because when we think about, should I take ADHD medicine? All the fears come in, all the questions come in, all the horrible information on the internet comes in, and we're making these decisions usually out of fear because we don't know enough to truly make the best decision for us. Again, going back to that self-trust diatribe I just did, like we don't trust that this is the right answer for us. And we listen to all the outside opinions, and your video just perfectly explained it. So I kind of wanted to work through the key points that you talked about and help the mom listening understand in her own heart, why would this make sense for me? And then how can I make the best decision given this information that I've learned, and wrestle through that instead of out of fear, stepping into it with, I've done my research. I understand why I'm doing this. And I wholeheartedly am ready to take that step if that is the path they want to go down. So you started out with the question of, someone had asked you this question, you were answering it, about, is being neurodivergent less than, and then does that mean that big pharma is just over here capitalizing on our weaknesses and making all their money to fill their wallets and, take advantage of us?
Right.
So how do you respond when people ask you that question?
I will say, of all the things that have ever been a tough decision for me, the decision to give my kid medicine and for me to take medicine was never a hard decision. So there's maybe a couple of reasons for that. I mean, I think we all are raised with different values and beliefs and stories and narratives about medicine in our families. So everyone comes from their own personal background. My mom's a doctor, so I kind of grew up with medicine around me. So it's never been something that seemed mysterious or foreign. My first career before I did this was in pharma and biotech. I am not unfamiliar with medicine on any level. So I've always had a comfort level there. So I will say that when I didn't really know anything, and when I was a wee young therapist about ADHD, and I was kind of like anxiety and mood disorders, and maybe some trauma was my wheelhouse, there's no point at which I think I had occasion to say to a client, I think it's time to talk to your GP about medicine. Because the efficacy of psychotherapy and antidepressants, for example, without a lot of comorbidities, so a fairly simplistic case, are equally efficacious. And then together, they're more efficacious. So if someone was continuing to really struggle, then of course, we would recommend that. But with ADHD, it's a completely different thing. So the efficacy of psychostimulant medication for ADHD is so head and shoulders above what psychotherapy by itself would offer, that it's almost unethical to continue to offer psychotherapy without providing that education. And a lot of people will go do therapy and then it won't go well. And they'll feel like they failed therapy and walk away demoralized and dejected. If they don't know they had ADHD, the therapist couldn't catch it, or if they haven't, they're not medicated. It has nothing to do with your ability to work hard. It's your ability to stay consistent. And that is kind of part of the central issue with ADHD, right? So it became really clear to me really early, and then just having our own experience, that this was the way to go. I'm reading the guidelines, I'm looking for the evidence, I'm reading global guidelines, so not just Canadian guidelines. Like, we've got 100 years of data and recommendations and best practices. So there's that stuff. The whole question of like, oh my God, does my kid have to be on this for the rest of his life? Like, yeah, you could ask that question. You could also just say, how about we just try this for a month and see how it goes? Because the proof is in the pudding. So the other thing that's different about these medicines, I think there's lots of myths to unpack. One of which is like, when you start an antidepressant, which a lot of people are familiar with, it takes 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks to know whether you're reaching peak efficacy. There's maybe some side effects you got to push through, night sweats, things like that, grogginess, all that kind of stuff, some nausea maybe. And then maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. We're not really too sure yet. And if it does work, that's amazing because we need the benefit if it's working. But if it's not, that can be really frustrating. Stimulant medication is like, within an hour and a half, whether that sucker's working. And it may not be working to full capacity. So we've got to track our symptoms and then titrate the dose to manage symptoms, just like you would with blood pressure. If anyone out there has high blood pressure, you go to the doctor, they give you your blood pressure pill, and they're treating to a target. And you have to get to that number. And until you get to that number, you need to be doing all the lifestyle interventions and changes, as well as dealing with the dose of your medicine, because that's the goal of treatment. And so it becomes really clear, like, what's our goals here? So then for me, my thinking is like, not wanting to do something now for a benefit or a fear for something later is like, it's the medical version of time blindness. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, what's the downside of not treating this kid? Holy shit, there's a mortality rate, an average 22 years loss of life for untreated ADHD, addiction, going to jail, divorce. I mean, it's not pretty. And I'm just like, okay, if I'm going to treat him, it's just to prevent all that crap. So I think early on, it's a hard decision in the sense that you don't want to make the wrong move and you don't want to give your kid something that you don't think is safe. So the safety data is there. The one thing I'll say is that in Canada, we have pretty clear first line recommendations, and they're all long acting psychostimulants. No one's getting short acting stuff. I mean, there might be the odd person getting it here or there, but it's for like a very specific reason. It's not the norm. Whereas I think in the US, everything's still prescribed. I could be wrong. So I don't want to.
There's still a pretty good mix.
Speak. Yeah. If you're on a stimulant, you're on a long acting stimulant. And the safety data for one of them in particular that's a prodrug is quite reassuring. So I didn't have any worries there. So for me, I don't know, does that really answer your question? Like, it was kind of simple. And then the big pharma thing. So my response in that video was probably something along the lines of, these aren't charities. They're not philanthropic organizations. They're research-based organizations that are for profit. They're using that money for themselves or whatever, dividends, shareholders, all that kind of stuff. But they're the ones making the medicines that are improving our lives and curing diseases. So, feel how you want to feel about pharma. But if, God forbid, anyone in my family gets cancer, I'm going to be lined up to get the best treatment I can get. And I'm really grateful that this treatment exists because it transformed our family's life. So I don't know. I mean, again, I want to respect everyone's experience or perception of pharma. I mean, it is what it is, but I've not had a bad one. So from my own personal experience, I can only speak to that. And I also know that there's a lot of people who can't afford some of the medicines and the companies pay for it. I have loads of clients getting it almost completely covered from the company. So they're not making money on anybody. It's costing them money, That's pretty great.
Do you wish there was a way to feel confident about your day? To know exactly where you need to be, when you need to be there, and what you need to do today. I know what it's like to buy 15 different planners and not use any of them for more than a week or two. When you're tired of disappointing your family, your boss, and yourself. Imagine with me that tonight, when you look back at your day, you know that you did the things on your to-do list. You showed up well. You feel productive and accomplished. That's why I created Daily Planning for ADHD Moms, where I teach you how to keep a calendar and organize your to-do list. When you learn these skills from another ADHD brain in super short videos, they finally make sense. So now you'll be able to keep up with the commitments you've made and feel confident in how you're organizing your day. You'll walk away with an easy to stick to 3-step system to keep up with your calendar and a simple way to sort through the giant to-do list and figure out what actually matters. Plus, we have a weekly accountability group so you can ask questions when you're stuck and jump back on the wagon when you fall off. Because you will fall off. That's just part of ADHD. But now you will know how to prepare for that. So if you're ready to figure out your day in a way that makes sense both for mom life and an ADHD brain, I want to help you make this happen. Join me at bit.ly/ADHD plan. That's bit.ly/ADHD plan. It's all lowercase letters. I cannot wait to see you feel confident and competent in how you run your family life. Like, I want people to understand that idea of, yes, they are for-profit businesses, but they are the ones doing the work. They're the ones doing the research and the testing, and all that cost money. And the people who can't afford it are paying, and the people who can't, there's usually, not always, but there's usually some kind of savings program available for a good portion of medicines. May not be the one you want, but there's one there.
We have links to it, the American links for stuff as well as the Canadian ones on our website, because I think it's important to provide that information.
Thank you. No, that's good to know. But all that research costs money, quite a lot of money. And that's what you're paying for. And it is hard as a family for a lot of people to make those payments, but know that they're not there to capitalize on our weakness. They're the ones doing the research and putting the money in and the effort to actually find the answer for us. That's how we have.
There's like a lot of layers to that onion.
Yes. And it's a really,
and so it's good to chunk it and to know that right here in my home, me and my kid, between the two of us, there's a decision that we're making, my husband and I and our kid. I can't solve all the problems of big pharma and the economy and government. Like my kid's not going to pay the price for those people's problems. I'm not going to let that happen. As my job as a parent is to protect him from that. I personally think whatever conflict I have, I'm going to sort that out, but he's not going to suffer in the meantime if I can help it. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing like these are all questions from the audience. And when I read between the lines of the question, there was a lot of stigma within the family of taking medicine and the quote unquote big pharma and all this that comes with it. And what I interpret the question to mean, obviously reading between the lines, is that they feel like they shouldn't take medicine because their family is telling them it's all a scheme from these companies to take your money.
Right.
And that's not what it's about. Like, don't get me wrong, they're getting plenty of money, but it's not about them. It's about you.
I mean,
you need.
I think as women, if like a majority of people listening are moms and as women, I think there's a long line of people all over our lives telling us what we should do with our bodies. And without getting super political or anything, I would say, you know what, you do you, I'll do me, I'll figure it out. And it's okay to experiment. So it's okay to do a medication trial and see how it goes. This isn't marriage. We're not getting married for life here, right? With trying this out. If you don't like it, don't take it anymore then. Figure something else out. But if you don't know what you're saying no to, then you don't know what you don't know. And is that true informed consent? Like, is that clarity? So I'm not saying you have to try it in order to have clarity. I'm just saying if that particular conflict that you mentioned is the reason why you're not trying it, then it's just like I don't know. So, I mean, if you have type 1 diabetes and you wouldn't take insulin because of that, or if you get cancer, God forbid, and you won't take the chemo because you feel that way about the drug companies, I mean, no one can force anyone to take treatment. So if that's your value, that's your value. Because there are people who reject treatment completely. Yeah. And if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. And we all have autonomy. We all have the ability to make those decisions. And so people have to do what they have to do. But it's okay to make a little bit of room just to have the conversation and to talk about things that feel heavy and scary and just unpack it and sort it out. And talking about it and being open to a discussion and feeling all the things still doesn't mean you need to do anything. So everyone's allowed to figure out what they need to figure out. So when they do take that step, they're choosing it. It's their choice to take that step, right? People with ADHD love to experiment though. So while all the people with ADHD are fighting medication, so that crowd, they're doing so much self-medication. It's unbelievable. So I think something I like to do sometimes with people is actually make an inventory of all the ways they self-medicate. And people don't necessarily label the things they're doing that are self-medication as self-medication. Like they think they're being natural and stuff. And it's just like, well, it's like Dr. Halliwell says, like, why are you wearing glasses? You should just be squinting if you believe in being natural, because glasses are the original disability aid, because squinting's natural. And so really, how far are we going to take this? Right? Are we allowed to just do things for ourselves and to supplement things in our body that our body's not making right? I don't know. I mean, everyone's got to, again, make their own choice. So for me, it's neither here nor there whether someone goes on medication that I'm working with. I have nothing to gain either way. My interest from an ethics point of view is upholding client autonomy, which includes someone's having all of the information for informed consent. In order to consent to a clinical trial, for example, you have to know all the good things that are going to happen, hopefully, but also all the bad things that could happen. Yeah. And that's how you make a clear decision about whether you want to move forward or not. And to me, this is the same thing. When I'm educating about what the gold star path to treatment is for like really well managed ADHD for all the best outcomes. Here's what it is, and here's why. And let's spend some time talking through all of the things that you've got questions about so you have all the right information with which to make your decision. It's their decision.
Yeah. And that is the whole purpose of these conversations, is to know that you, mama listening, have all the information that you can, or as much as you can locate, to make the best decision for you. I'm not here to tell you you have to take medicine. I'm not here to tell you don't take it ever. It's about you knowing enough information that you can make a well-educated decision and not making decisions out of fear and choosing what's best for you. Because like you said, there are family members who are going to tell you you should or shouldn't do something. And we have to take a moment and say, are they saying it because this is medicine for what they view as a mental thing? Would they say that same thing to you for your blood pressure medicine or something like that? And like understanding that information so that you can decide how much do you want to take that opinion into account.
I mean, I think also on a bit of a primitive level, which we're all beholden to, like our nervous system response. When you want to do something different than the pack, we're setting ourselves apart from the pack. And there might be a feeling of, oh, you think you're better than us, or, oh, you think, you need something different than we need, or, oh, like you're forcing a bit of a reflection for all the naysayers because they're like, well, I didn't do anything about it. And that makes people uncomfortable. And I guess it's okay for people to be uncomfortable. What happens is that people get uncomfortable and then we think we need to rush in and make them feel better. Like we think that's our job. And if it's your kid, it's your job. But it's not your kid who's saying this stuff to you. It's all your peers, right? Within your family, people who are older than you and people who are like your brothers and sisters, maybe, or your cousins or whatever. So there's boundary stuff there too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you tell someone in my family what they should and shouldn't do, that's not my place, right?
Yeah. But when you've been socialized as a woman to smooth the bumps and don't rock the boat, there's like this primitive urge to be like, it's okay, I'm not going to do that, and try to smooth everything out. So I also want to validate like that is a normal response. There's nothing wrong with
biological. Yeah.
Like there's a reason we don't want to be separated from the herd, because that's how people got, left behind in the snow
to clarify, when I say biological, I don't mean like sex-based. I mean like gender-based or anything. I mean like every human doesn't want to be separated out from the pack. Like that's a human biological function of safety. Right. We have safety in numbers. So when the numbers splinter, we're more at risk of being eaten by a predator. So genetically, physiologically, that incites agitation in the human nervous system, right? We want to be reassured. We want to know we're okay.
Now, I want to touch back to something else you said about when your ADHD goes untreated, and that leaves us open to, I think you said like we have a 22-year
average life.
Yeah. Can you talk just a little bit about like, what are those ways that a lot of times we don't take into account? Like, cause when we're thinking about like pros and cons of medicine, we think about like, oh, I might have a stomach ache, and, and people worry about getting addicted to stimulants, which I don't know if we're going to talk about today, but sure, but debunk that myth in a sec. Like, what are those other things that we should be accounting for in the big picture?
So the data that we have shows that people, it was a huge study that was done. I think it was probably published in like 2014 or 2015, looking at over 2 million people over the span of like 30 years. So they followed them from the age of 1 to just past the age of 30. And they looked at the people who had ADHD in this massive cohort of people. When did they die and what did they die from compared to people who didn't have ADHD? So people with ADHD are twice as likely to die prematurely, and usually from accidents. So like, who wants to go heli skiing, everybody? So like accidents, car wrecks, poor health, violence, domestic violence, being a perpetrator or a receiver of domestic violence, being in prison and everything that comes with that. Smoking and self-medicating your whole life leads to all kinds of diseases later on in life, but mostly it was accidental death. So that's impulsivity, inattentiveness, risk-taking, dopamine-seeking stuff, right? And the scariest part for me about that data is I think you'd think it was the opposite, but women have 2.5 times more of a likelihood of dying than the men did of that cohort. And so you're like, well, geez, like what did the women are all going hella skiing? Like, no, it's not that. It's that the longer you live with undiagnosed ADHD, the more comorbidities you pick up along the way. So undiagnosed ADHD turns into anxiety because it's pretty anxiety provoking. And you live with untreated or not well treated anxiety for long enough, that's pretty depressing and demoralizing. So then we got depression on top of it. And then all the things that come with that, like there's a higher likelihood if you have undiagnosed ADHD to have PTSD and to be in toxic relationships and all that kind of stuff, toxic workplace experiences, to get divorced, all those things that kind of pile up and pile up and pile up. And you get into midlife and it's really hard. It becomes really hard. And then financial difficulties on top of that. And the ultimate outcome of depression, chronic and going on for a really long time, could be suicide. And the rate for women with ADHD not well treated is higher than it is for men. Holy geez, what other part of mental health does that data exist for women? I don't know that it does. So for me, the mortality data, that's a thing. I mean, that's a thing. Like those are outcomes. And then the addiction piece. So like the rate of addiction in the general population is like, I think 12, 13%. But in the untreated ADHD population, it's closer to 60 to 70%. Like let's take that whole pot smoking crowd in the high school parking lot and screen them all. They're self-medicating. So let's treat them properly so they don't got to do that because the long-term effects of that is way worse. In the short term, it works great, right? But it's the long term, the data is actually starting to show that it's not good at all. All the endpoints that are about executive function and frontal lobe activity and all that stuff, it makes it worse if you're under the age of 24. I guess if you're like 25 and up, what have you. But so we're mammals, right? Like our bodies are designed to keep homeostasis on the inside, meaning a balance of things. And so if you're constantly not having the right either receptor activity or availability of dopamine or epinephrine to do the basic frontal lobe functions of life, your body's going to seek it out in the environment from around you. So it's what's available: cigarettes, drugs, food, sex, gaming, all the things that are pleasurable that allow our brains to like feel alive and to know that we're okay and we're going to keep going. And they're really just short-term fixes, but really detrimental in the long term if it goes unchecked, right? So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, and that's the kind of information, like when other moms come to me and say, I have to decide what to do about medicating my kid. How do I make that decision?
Yeah.
I'm like delicately trying to explain to them like how their child might die if they don't treat it. And it's like always an awkward conversation. Like, this is the truth. This is the data that tells us that our kids are far more at risk. And we as women are far more at risk when we don't have a well-executed treatment plan that's like well-rounded.
I mean, I think even before you even get to that data, it's kind of like this question of what are you thinking the adverse effects of stimulants are? Let's clarify that first, because I think there's a lot of misinformation there. So that's one thing to square away. And then, sometimes it's like, well, what are you treating for, but what are you treating to prevent? And you can look at it both ways. And then what does treating mean? Like, is it really like, do I need to treat away my ADHD? It's like, no, we're not actually trying to take away any of the stuff about you that's wonderful and magical and really cool. And stimulant medication doesn't do that, nor should it. You might be dosed too high if you feel like it's doing that. But what we're doing is untying your shoelaces so you can like run free, like just like everybody else. We're filling your tank with gas. So you have the same amount of gas in your tank as everyone that's got to drive the same distance every day. Like you're not having to stop 87 times from here to there to refill, which is what like a day self-medicating is you're bopping from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, getting your hit, whether it's crisis management, putting out every fire and never getting to your stuff. However your life is set up, that seems like it's just happened, but it hasn't. It's your body making it happen to keep functioning, and from my perspective, so you can keep doing that, or you can compare and contrast with the experiences to not have to do that. And if you don't like it, then you can go back to the way you were doing it and make some other tweaks along the way. Like it's always the choice of somebody.
I'm like, man, I could sit here and talk with you forever, but I promised.
Yeah, we can do a follow-up maybe at some point for sure.
When we're considering taking medicine is to look at that big picture. Well, yes, we're looking at in the moment right now too, but we're looking at the big picture and how much are we what ifing what there's this tiny slim chance that might happen. And what are we discounting or not even considering in that big picture?
Yeah, those are
Long-term?
good questions. And make sure you're getting medical advice from an expert. Don't be afraid to ask your doctor what their experience is with ADHD. Are they affiliated with big ADHD organizations, with the patient advocacy groups? When did you learn about it? I heard they don't teach ADHD in med school, doc. When did you learn about it? Because you seem to know what you're doing. You can just be curious about it. It doesn't have to be like I'm interviewing you to see if you're qualified to be my physician. No, like they're not going to like that. I don't think very many people would, but you can be curious about it in a disarming way that's nice, that provides you with how they answer a lot of really good information, right? So it's okay to get information from lots of different places and, go with your gut, man. Like you're going to know, Patricia, when you said, like, when I talk to people who have ADHD, I think ADHD brains, like we just click and we kind of get each other. And it's kind of this really cool, it actually is represented in the literature, which is interesting. We find each other, marry each other, and then procreate and have kids, right? Because we click, we get each other. Yeah. But when you find a doc who's an ADHD doc, like that's lots of fun. For all the people listening, when you find a therapist or a physician of any type who like really digs ADHD and is specialized in it, it's not because they were bored one day and decided to like find this really undertreated and under-recognized area and specialize in it. Like they probably have it, or their kid has it, or they're married to somebody with it, right? So you can, let's be free to be ourselves and really explore all those things. Because I think people who are passionate about ADHD love talking about it. So if you're talking to a doctor who's not interested in talking about it, that's almost a signal right there that they're probably not the expert for you. And I know there's different constraints in the US in terms of who you can see. And I don't know how that works as well. But in Canada, at least, I think there's a little bit more freedom in trying to be referred to somebody who is an expert.
Before we do our lightning round, I want to ask you that for the mamas who are listening in Canada, because we do have quite a few listeners who are there. Do you have a resource or something on your website that they could connect to and find the resources that fit where they are located? People ask me all the time, and I'm not familiar with the Canadian system. So
yeah. So like the states, you guys are limited by state, we're limited by province. So similar setup there, but you can go to our website and on our ADHD resource page, which maybe you can link that page in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes.
We reference two major national organizations. One is CADAC, CADDAC.ca, which is the National Patient Advocacy Organization. So people can find clinics and assessment centers and coaches and therapists all across the whole country. It's great and amazing advocacy work that they do, and like free webinars and resources and all kinds of information. And then CADRA, CADDRA, is the clinician, Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance. So that's where all the docs and psychologists and therapists and even nurses that are really interested in ADHD join that. And so all the clinical expertise is housed there. And I don't know that they have a referral thing that the public can access. Maybe they do actually, but if you're a clinician yourself, it's a global organization. The conferences annually are amazing. So I would recommend checking it out and joining. It's totally worth it. And so those are the two things that are linked. And then there's loads of other resources linked on our website to dig into and learn more for sure.
Okay, good. I'm happy to have that resource to refer to. So thank you. Okay, lightning round questions. All you have to do is just fill in the blank. You don't have to explain anything. Okay. But number one, the best thing that I've read or listened to recently is
James Clear book, Atomic Habits.
One of my favorites. Number two, the most boring about me fact is
I don't really have any good hobbies anymore. I need good hobbies.
Number three, when I'm having a rough day, my go-to quote, song, poem, book, activity, whatever is.
Oh, so I actually have a specific playlist that I've made and made a blog post about it. That is a Vagal Breaks playlist. So it's all these songs that no matter what mood I'm in, it immediately, as soon as I turn it on, like lifts my mood, lifts me up into a higher state of functioning. So I hit play.
Number four, don't tell anyone I
still bite my nails.
Number five, if I had a magic fairy wand for one spell, I would.
World peace right now. Like that sounds really cheesy, but I would want all of the angry people in the world to stop being so angry. Yeah.
Number six, my best piece of advice for mamas with ADHD is.
Oh, find an ADHD trained therapist. Could be really, really transformational.
Now that all the moms have fallen in love with you, where can they find you and connect with you?
Through the website is digalittledeeper.ca. And from the bottom of that, it's on Instagram. I'm at Dig a Little Deeper Therapy. And from there, you would find links to find me in other places. At TikTok, it's not the same name. I'm Stina905, STINA 905. Because I had joined TikTok just to watch cat videos, not to make a work account, but it turned into an ADHD account. So that's why it's a different name. It's just the end of my name. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and being willing to talk about this, because it's a really hard topic for a lot of us to delve into, and it's full of fear and worry. And I so appreciate you being willing to share and be honest and open up so that more moms can be encouraged and really lean into their ADHD brains. So thank you.
Totally. Thanks for having me. I'm happy if the information helps and provides some peace of mind for people, and at least just lets them know that there's lots of perspectives out there, and it's good to keep asking questions. Keep doing it.
Hey there, Mama. I've got something fun for you. Who doesn't love a quiz? I want to know, which mama animal are you? Because you're not your average mama bear. You have a magical ADHD brain that puts a sprinkle of brilliance on everything you do. Sure, you may have forgotten that laundry in the washer for the third time, but what are your strengths? What makes your ADHD parenting style unique to you? How do you use that sparkle to bless your family? So which mama animal are you? Find out by taking the quiz, What's Your ADHD Mama Parenting Style? Because you're not your average mama bear. Head on over to patriciasung.com/quiz and find out. And then when you do, I want you to post your results on social media so we can see that you're #not your average mama bear. Along with the hashtag I'm a mama, and then fill in the animal that you get. Again, that's patriciasung.com/quiz. And I can't wait to see what you get. So tag me at Motherhood in ADHD. For more resources, classes, and community, head over to my website, motherhoodinadhd.com.